Hello and welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Bryant and I'll be your host for this webinar. Please make sure your microphones and web cameras are disabled during the presentation to provide for smooth recording. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You are welcome to use the chat box at any time during the webinar for comments and insights. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar is on August 26th, 2020 update basics of Find My Past with James Tanner, and that'll be on Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. If you'd like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from James Tanner, who will be giving a presentation on using the internet like a pro. Genealogists have no idea what's out there. James has over 35 years experience on genealogical research and is an avid blogger of Genealogy's Star blog and Rejoice and Be Exceedingly Glad. He is an author and co-author of over 25 books on genealogical research and has presented at expos and conferences around the US and Canada. He has served for 10 years as a missionary at the Mesa, Arizona FamilySearch Library and is currently serving at the BYU Family History Library. James has 7 children, 34 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. And if James is ready, then we'll turn the time over to him.
Everybody out there, nice to have you here today. I'm glad for the opportunity. We're sort of substituting today, but that's always a possibility with our kind of uncertain world. Right now, we mentioned, Bryant mentioned that I am, and my wife and I are missionary volunteers at the Brigham Young University Family History Library on the BYU campus in Provo, Utah. Unfortunately, the campus is closed to non-students and only students and staff are allowed to go into the library. So we are doing our support by distance learn online and by email and by telephone, whatever way you want to contact. You can contact the library with a question or a research issue, and one of the volunteer missionaries will be assigned to help you resolve that particular issue. You can also contact me directly. I'm online on practically every possible way you can think of, and so I would be more than happy to help. Today we're going to talk about using the internet like a pro, and my subtitle on this was Genealogists Have No Idea What's Out There. Now, individually, as genealogists, you probably might be aware of some of the programs and websites that I talk about today. But I'm hoping that I'll be able to highlight a few things that you're not aware of and that might help you. I would point out to start that there are about 400 million active websites on the internet. Now, there's a lot of them that are inactive, but this is sort of the guesstimate number of websites out there. And the question I'd ask is, how many are helpful to genealogists and family historians? Well, the answer is surprisingly a lot more than we might think of if we were just kind of entering the idea of doing genealogy and doing family history. And even if we've been doing it for years and spent a considerable amount of time online, I find out when I talk to people that there are lots of resources out there. Now, what we're going to talk about a little bit here is what kinds of topics are helpful for genealogical research. I mean, what are the kinds of things that you need to know about to be a good genealogist? And I might suggest history. Obviously, that's a good topic. Geography is another very important topic, because if you can't figure out where people lived, you have a really difficult time finding them and identifying them. How about photography? Well, you know, we do a fair amount of photography and do a lot of working with photographs, that probably something to be helpful, but you might want to know. Cartography, anything about maps, what's going on with maps, so probably helpful. Languages, depending on where your ancestors came from, obviously you need some languages. Religion, we're going to be searching church records. We're probably going to need to know something about what religion our ancestors had to help find their records, particularly as you go back in time. Church records become extremely valuable. So knowing about that law, oh, well, what do you know? We have to search probate records, court records, land and property records. All that has to do with law. So it might be helpful to know a little bit of law. Art, mm, you might wonder why that would be important, but think of all of the illustrations and things that we have to do as genealogists. And for example, I'm putting together this particular presentation, and it's not very artful, but it's at least something. Library science. Now, I'm going to have to say that this would be, from my perspective, one of the most valuable things that you could know about as a genealogist. If you know how to use libraries, then you've really got a good step up. Well, what about the rest of the stuff? Oh, yeah, there's quite a bit more out there that's helpful for us to know. And the real answer to this is that just about everything you can learn will help you with genealogical research, period. I don't have a period there, but it would be an exclamation point, I guess, too. And that's just literally true. It's your life. What you've learned during your life is what's going to help you do your genealogy. But basically, it's also a good idea to keep learning and to keep advancing in what you know and what the things that you maybe aren't so comfortable with, like the language of your ancestors or the legal problems or things like that, that sometimes make it really difficult for researchers. So another thing that I'm trying to get through to today is that we move beyond the traditional genealogical database family tree websites. We sometimes have a tendency to have favorites. So some like to work with FamilySearch, some work on Ancestry, some have a desktop program and they work on their desktop program all the time. And some people have MyHeritage and Find My Past and other online and on desktop type programs. So the question is, what do we do beyond that? And that's exactly what I'm going to talk about today, is let's move out, clear out past the horizon there. So we get into things that we may not identify immediately as being helpful to our genealogical research because they don't say anything about genealogy. They don't have that word in their title or their description, and they're not advertised as genealogical websites. If you look at a list, comes up fairly commonly online of the 100 best websites for genealogy or so forth and so forth. If you look down through the list, every single one of them is going to have something about genealogy. Well, what I'm going to talk about today is moving beyond that type of structure into websites that I use continually and are not identified as genealogy websites. Now, one thing I thought I ought to say is that I'm going to move very fast because I have lots of different websites to cover, and we want to have some time for some questions. And I just want to make sure you understand that these websites are uploaded to the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel and also put on the BYU Family History Library website, which is on the byu.edu website. And you can watch these webinars again as many times as you want. And you can stop the video at any time to take notes or look up some of the websites that I talk about. So don't be afraid. There's actually another way you could do this, and that is you can have your smartphone camera or your camera available, and as I bring up a slide, you can take a picture of the slide. So that's another way you can get the information. We do that sometimes when presentations, and you are free to use any information that I ever put out on any of my webinars. So here we go. Oh, and I need to make a little bit of explanation here. Some of these websites have been around for a very, very long time. And if you're very experienced in genealogy, you will instantly recognize that website. But this may be a reminder to you that that website is still out there and is still important and it still has information. And that's kind of what I do when I go through a list like this, because what that does is it helps me to remind myself that that there are some of these websites that I haven't looked at and that I really should, because I have research questions that I need to have answered, and they might just have the answer. So this is kind of where we are. And so some of these aren't brand new things on the internet. Some of these are tried and true and really old in the terms of genealogy and on the web, online apps, obviously, but they are old. And one question came up, what is this thing? What is the picture here? This actually a shortwave receiver, radio. So just in case you didn't recognize that. Okay, well, the first one we're going to talk about is WorldCat.org. I'm sure if you've used a computer at all, you're familiar with Google, and I'm going to kind of skip over Google. I'll mention it a couple of times, but I'm not really going to get into that in this particular presentation. But if you have if you're searching on Google and you're searching for your family or your family names, your surnames, and all of that kind of information, you're only doing half of the search. This, or even less perhaps, I don't know how much percentage-wise. But WorldCat.org is the other part of the search. This is a catalog of catalogs. There are over 2 billion catalog entries around the world in different libraries that are cataloged here on WorldCat.org. That's the contents of the libraries. So if you wanted to know what was in the BYU library, or if something was in the BYU library, or your local library, or the local university library, or whatever, you go to WorldCat and then you begin your search. And the important thing about the program is that it tells you the distance to the nearest library where that particular book or document or whatever is located. So this is an adjunct. It adds on to the value of Google and fills in all the stuff that Google doesn't find. So this is the first place that you go, and it isn't very difficult. You just go to that little white field there on the WorldCat.org website and fill in the blank with what you're looking for, and it will look for books and any other materials that are in the libraries, listed in the library catalogs around the world. And then you enter your the form right there says put in your zip code, or you put in your location, and then it will tell you how far it is to the nearest library that has that particular item. Sometimes you strike out. None of the libraries have what you're looking for. But I'm suggesting that you probably will find a new world of information with WorldCat. Now, this is the website. This is, and I kind of refer to a couple of these websites as kind of black hole websites. They sort of suck you in because they have so much information that it is almost inconceivable. And the Internet Archive is a nonprofit library of millions and millions of free books, movies, software, music, websites, everything you can imagine about the Internet and about what's available on the Internet. And so we're going to look at it here. And that's the icons down there are a little bit, we have to think about them for a minute. But in each case, you'll see some important ones here. You'll want to browse this because there's some things here that are very, very surprising. For example, this icon right here says that there are 26 million books digitized, word for word, searchable, and available for free on this website. And not only that, they are all in the public domain. And you can go here for films, audio files, concerts. The other day I was looking through here because I was just interested, and then I thought, well, maybe they have some poetry by Robert Frost. What does that have to do with genealogy? Not much. But anyway, and they did. They had like 50 different online recordings of his entire, almost everything he ever wrote. And there's just amazing things on this website. Now, what else is amazing is that many of the genealogical records that we rely on are here for free on this website. And they are pulling in documents. For example, they have the complete set of all of the U.S. federal census records, but they are the original copies of the census records, which you don't get on the other websites that have the census. And they have just a multitude of records from all over the United States. It's just, there's no agenda here on the Internet Archive. They just preserve everything they can get their hands on, and they do it for free. So this is the go-to place. If you've never explored this, you are in for a treat, because you will find things on here. Let me just kind of mention one thing that is not directly related to genealogy, but it always helps to understand the scope of this. All those health videos that you saw when you were a kid in grade school, if you went to grade school in the United States, they used to show you how to brush your teeth and stuff. They're all on here. You can go look at them. So if you're ever pining away for one of those old videos, the other thing, if you like really old programs, computer programs, this is the computer program icon right here. And if you want to go play Pong on your PC or your Mac, it's got it right here transferred over. Okay, stuff like that. 3.5 million images, all of the speeches and things like that. Television programs, old newsreels, all the stuff's there. Okay, move on. Now, part of the Internet Archive is the openlibrary.org. And the openlibrary.org is a way to check out all the books. Okay, so now you have, not all of them, but there's about 2 million books on here to be checked out. A lot of us use a website called Overdrive that has a selection of books. Well, these are all public domain books, so not all of them are right up to date. They're not the latest novels, not the stuff on the New York bestsellers list, stuff like that, New York Times bestsellers list. This is books that are references. And one of the things that I found here is all of the old, and also on the Internet Archive, is all of the old county and state and even country histories. And all of these are in all different languages. When you start talking about 28 million books, that makes it larger than any paper library in the entire world. This is the largest. This is one of the largest libraries in the world, only basically challenged by Google. And we'll get to that. So you can check out these books for 2 weeks. It doesn't cost anything. It's free. You can, and they will just check themselves back in. You don't have to worry about paying fines. You don't have to worry about anything. And I have found books that I could not find, and the only other alternative was I could buy the book. But here they are for free, and that you can check out. Now, this is also related to the first two. And how is it related? Well, this is Reclaim the Records. And Reclaim the Records is an organization that, a nonprofit organization that has dedicated itself to freeing records from the grasp of the government. And unfortunately, in many, many cases, records which technically should be free and accessible to the public are behind some kind of paywall or are totally they're not available. You can only order a copy instead of looking through and searching through the records for your ancestors. So what Reclaim the Records has done is brought Freedom of Information Act lawsuits against various record repositories, primarily New York and some other states, and to free the records. And they have freed millions of records so far. And a lot of those records have gone directly onto the Internet Archive. So things like the like New York birth and death records that are now being liberated by Reclaim the Records, you should search for those on the Internet Archive. And if you go to reclaimtherecords.org, you'll find a list of the records that they have so far liberated. So this is, and if you happen to have some record sets that aren't available, then you can actually enlist their help in getting those records freed. So it's an extraordinary website and a good adjunct to the family, to doing your genealogy and your family history in some areas. So remind you that many of these records are posted on the Internet Archive. That's archive.org, the website that I just talked about. Now, here's one you may or may not be aware of. This is the Digital Public Library of America. And yes, the URL or the Internet address is dp.la. That's it. That's the whole address. That's all you have to type in, just dp.la, and you go right to the Internet Archive. And as it says up there on the heading, they have over 40 million images now. And what is the what is the Digital Public Library, the DPLA? Basically what it is a organization that started a few years ago to free information up, to free up information. So they have the same kind of idea as the Internet Archive and as the Reclaim the Records. In this case, everything that goes on here is accessible for free. Not so sure that everything is free of copyright claims, but it is accessible for free on the website. And this is kind of like the situation where people, when you talk about newspapers, online newspapers, which by the way, they have a lot of that. But the question is, people say to me, well, when they digitize the newspapers, does that include the obituaries? And I say, no, they cut them out before they digitize them. And they go, I go, no, not really. I said, anything that they can get, they get, and it includes everything. It includes all of the information. So what's happened here with the DPLA is that it has, they have, as many other websites that I'll talk about, sucked in a considerable amount of genealogical information and records and sources that are valuable to researchers in the genealogical community. So this is one of the websites that you should be familiar with. And it's another one of those that's kind of like a black hole. It sucks you in because there's so much information here and there's so many things in here that you can look at and do. So don't get distracted. But if you do a search on here, they have a specific searches for genealogical information. So you can get here and they'll be helpful in finding information. Okay, now we're going to talk about one that's a little bit more esoteric, and that's the HathiTrust. The HathiTrust is a digital library, and it is basically an organization of the larger university libraries in the United States. So this is the university libraries, and they have basically are in the process and have quite a bit of the work done of digitizing their entire collections and everything now. So what that means is they have 17 million total volumes, but of that, 6.7 million of those are in the public domain. The rest of those volumes, you'll find maybe a summary or a preview of it, but the rest of the information, you'll at least know where it is. and then you can search on a specific, you'll get some kinds of looks at it from a page or whatever. But you can't read the entire book. But on the public domain ones, you can actually read the whole book. Now, what I failed to mention about the Internet Archive is that you can download all of that stuff. Now, if you just wanted to sit there and download books all day, you could, because they have just an immense, you can download them in about 6 or 8 different formats. And so between these websites, the 2 websites, HathiTrust and the Internet Archive, you have a tremendous amount of information that you probably have not tapped. And so I've just kind of mentioned that. Now, of course, I should, and I mentioned that I would mention Google Books, because Google Books Google started many years ago and fought through a number of lawsuits and legal actions to maintain the right to do that. They have basically digitized something over 30 million books. Now, some of those are in the public domain, and they are freely, completely searchable and readable on Google Books. So when you go from the Internet Archive to HathiTrust to Google Books, you have basically created a mass of information. There's a lot of overlap because there just aren't that many books in the world, but it's a finite number. But and what's happening is that between those 3 websites and using WorldCat to actually discover where the book might be, and then what the actual title is and the actual author is, then you can use all of that to establish just about anything you're wanting to learn about. And I've been finding, because I've just started working with some of my New England ancestors here in the United States, that I have been finding that I'm getting whole books full of certain family lines of information. What's the value? What good, are they good? Is the information supported by some kind of source or whatever? The answer, well, yes, and sometimes no. But a lot of times these books were written in the time frame when my ancestors were alive, and the people we're trying to search for were actually there and being interviewed or talked to by the authors of these books. So it's a little bit different when you get into books and get back into the world of all of these huge websites. So now we're talking and cumulatively of somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 million to 100 million scanned books, some of which are duplicates, obviously, but not that many actually. Okay, now we're going to switch into another gear altogether and talk about some websites that are probably a little bit obscure here in the United States, but well known internationally and particularly well known in their country. This is Trove, and I'm using this as an example of a class of websites that are nationally sponsored websites. Now that's like the DPLA, but here in the United States, we don't really have a nationally sponsored website that includes this kind of all of this sort of eclectic amount of information that these websites do in some of these other countries. And so what you can do is look for the national library or the national library in each of the countries that you might be interested in. And that will get you into that realm. And sometimes they're related to or part of the archives or some other part of the government. But a lot of the countries have these national websites, and surprisingly, a lot of them have websites that are directly related to genealogy and genealogically significant records. And now this is Trove. The only thing you can say about Trove is that it may very well be the largest online digital collection in the world. And there's one kind of little challenge with it. It's not a little, it's a significant challenge. One significant challenge is that much of it is in the National Library of Australia. And the National Library of Australia, you have to actually live in Australia and have a library card. So there's going to be a lot of times when you won't be able to see the information, but there's so much information. I looked on here, tried to find a number, and I think what happened is that they can't do it they don't have any idea anymore how many pages or how much information they had. They stopped at something over 50 to 60 million pages, and that includes newspapers and all sorts of other information out there. And we say, well, I don't have any ancestors in Australia. Well, I happen to. I have two. My family lines came through Australia, but that's just a chance. But the trove doesn't stop at just Australian. This is they have a partnership, and there's a list here of their partners that is expansively all over, and you can find a lot of information here. This is one of this is the go-to website for some kinds of research, particularly having to do with Australia, New Zealand, but in the whole world. Now, what's the counterpart? I mentioned that there are websites like this for countries around the world. Well, this is one of those like this websites. This one is called Europeana, and it is sponsored by the European, all of the Union, the EU, and it is this is another website where they have literally lost count of the number of images and the number of items that are here. Right here on this front page of Europeana is graveyard symbols, and explore the meaning behind the architecture of gravestones, tombs, and graves. And what can you ask for that is more relevant to genealogy than something of that nature? So you just never know from the standpoint of this what kind of records you're going to find, because if you don't look, you'll never find them. And this includes libraries and archives and museums and galleries from all over Europe, everywhere. It's just amazing the amount of information and that is in this particular website. And so you just need to understand that broadening your reach as a genealogist, you shouldn't be limited to just those websites they tell you are for genealogy, because that's not really where all the information is. There's so much more out there. And I just came to the conclusion that there's too many digital images on these websites for them to even count anymore. And I think they're acquiring so many new that it's just become a mammoth job to keep track of what's on their website. Now, this slips into a different type of website, and this is a specialty website, and this is a family history website, but I feel like it was very important to bring to kind of direct attention to this kind of website, to this one right here, because this goes to an area where a lot of people, a lot of genealogists get into having a difficult time finding information and finding records and even getting started. And this is the Foundation for Eastern European Family History Studies, and it's called FEEFHS, and it's also a nonprofit, and this is also a free website. And on this, one thing that's helpful is that they have in the past had an annual conference at the Salt Lake Family History Library in Salt Lake City, and had people who are experts come to those conferences and help people one-on-one in the library for a couple of days before the conference. And if you happen to look at the list here, you'll find out that Joe Everett, who is the BYU Family History Library and Religion librarian in the Family History Library where we're volunteering, is on the member of the board of directors and they're directors of this particular organization. So these people are they're very well known in the area of Eastern European genealogy research. And the amount of information and the links and out to the various countries will get you started in looking on websites in the Eastern European countries. We're talking countries like Latvia and Estonia and Lithuania and Ukraine and all of those kinds of countries where you may or may not know where to begin with the records that are available. So this is kind of the kind of website. And another point is that this is also a type of website that you should be looking for online. You should be looking for a website that has that talks about family history or genealogy in a particular area of the world. So if you need to know about African genealogy, for example, go online and look for organizations, companies, societies, foundations for African family history or for African genealogy. And that's where you begin to become aware of these organizations and how helpful they can be to your own advancing your own research in a lot of ways. So what you remember about this is it has links to the Eastern European digital genealogy websites. So you just need to know that there's something like this out there, and that the same thing may exist in other areas of the world, and you just need to search for them. This is one of the old websites that I mentioned at the beginning, and it's been around for a really long time, as long in the terms of computers, because it's been out there since 1996. But it's basically a free genealogical website that has volunteers contributing all over actually the world, because there is a world GenWeb, a world GenWeb, and they have individual country GenWebs. And what they are is the people who are transcribing and talking about records in particularly small areas. So you can basically go here and look for records in any county in the United States. They may have them, they may not. They may have transcribed the census, they may have transcribed the cemetery records, they may have transcribed court records, they may have transcribed probate records. In other words, this is a go-to place that you should always remember to check when you get stumped in a particular county or someplace. And they have a special project called the Tombstone Project. It's not flashy and commercial like Find a Grave or Billion Graves, which are extremely valuable websites. But this is another place to look, because these are people that locally go out and record all of the names and all the information off of the tombstones. So you have a whole bunch of resources here. And if you haven't been on the GenWeb for a while, you really need to remember that as one of the things that you look for in any country, because you might want to find the GenWeb there. As they say, there's a ton of useful free information, and I can say that I have used the GenWeb many, many times to give me either confirm a date or actually find people that I have been unable to find any other way. This is another, I wanted to give an example of what happened if you actually went to a foreign language, other non-English language website. This is GenWiki. It's also part of two big websites, genealogy.net and Genealogists, the German equivalent, which I'm not going to attempt to say in German. And this is a huge website that gets you started and oriented into German research. So if you have a difficulty with your German research, this is that type of website. This is like the Foundation for East European Family History Studies website. This is the I would say German equivalent of that website, bringing together the information that is important to understand about German research, as opposed to Eastern European research, as opposed to the other websites which may give you more insight into English-based countries. So here's the German equivalent of some of those other websites, and is one gateway, not the only. There's others out there for German genealogy. There's many other websites, and Germans are fairly involved as a country, as an interest in genealogy, and you'll find that. And one of the things that we have found is that if, by and large, they're very careful genealogists as compared to some of the problems we have here in our country. This is another old website that you may have thought about or used in the past, or haven't used for a while, or maybe don't know about. And this is Cindy's list. And Cindy Engel has been doing this website now for I don't even know how many years. She was one of the very, very first people to get online and use the internet as a way to link up people with information. And she's become quite well known around the world. And this website, as you see down at the bottom, if you look, it says 337,000 plus links, and new updated links 13. This is a mammoth undertaking, and it's organized by subject and geographically, and it gives you links, and so it'll take you out into the world of the genealogy links out there that are out there. And if you relook at that, there are over 300,000 genealogically related websites, not counting all the ones that don't really come up on the genealogy radar, like the Internet Archive, for example. And these websites are extremely valuable to look at from time to time. So these are free links. It's a free website. So there's lots of information out there that's worth. Now I've tried a little bit. It's not always possible, but to the extent that I'm able, I usually, when I recommend a website to, at least particularly to beginners, is I always try to go to free websites, so that you're not surprised by having to pay to run into a paywall and or subscribe to something. But don't be surprised, because eventually there are always records that are behind paywalls that you need to be aware of. This is another old website. It's been around a long time. It was a volunteer kind of cooperative website for like US GenWeb and the individual GenWeb state organizations. But this one, rootsweb, was kind of like a bulletin board. It was the old bulletin board that began on the pre-internet days, where you could post information and ask for help, and put up information. And there's an extensive list of surnames that you can research here and find out if anybody's been doing research or what extra information they may have. Now, just to understand that this particular website was actually purchased by Ancestry.com. And so it's an ancestry website now. It's not, let's just say this, I won't say any more, it's just not the same as it used to be. But it is still a valuable website and something that you should be aware of as far as what's happening out there. Maybe you were afraid I wasn't going to mention the Library of Congress. There's one part of the Library of Congress that helps in a great measure. It's called Chronicling America. Most recently it has about almost 16.7, about almost 17 million pages of newspapers, completely digitized and completely searchable from the United States, and it's free. And it's part of the Library of Congress website, which is loc.gov, right there. I hope you've been noticing the addresses on each of these web pages. Sometimes the name of the website is the address, so it's not hard, but sometimes there's an address that's different. And if you're very acquainted with libraries, then you already know about LOC, which is the Library of Congress. But it's kind of a moderately frustrating website, because beyond this huge free collection of digital newspapers and a directory, if you look up at the corner right hand side of this image, you'll see it says U.S. Newspaper Directory 1690 to the present. If you want to find out if there was a newspaper in a county or in an area where your ancestors lived, that's as extensive a listing of all the newspapers that have been published as I am aware of. And you can go there to search. But here you can also search with a fairly sophisticated search engine for information. And it's, let's just call it infinitely entertaining to find out what happened with your ancestors, particularly if you're lucky enough or privileged enough to end up finding them in a small town newspaper, because you're going to be really surprised. My grandfather and grandmother lived in a small town, and I searched them, and they come up all the time on this. When I search, I got dozens and dozens of pages, and they when they had their Thanksgiving dinner, when the babies were born, when anybody got sick. Everything is in the newspaper. So it's just amazing. It helps give you an insight into people's lives. And this is the address. It's https://chroniclingamerica.llc.gov. But if you just type in llc.gov, there's a link to the digital websites and then to Chronicling America. So it's not that difficult to get to. And it's worth it just to go in and do a search on some of your ancestors' names to see what kind of newspaper articles come up. Don't be surprised if they got arrested, because sometimes that happens. So that's also in the newspaper. Okay, now if there wasn't enough information out there, we have what's called the FamilySearch Research Wiki, which is part of FamilySearch.org and is still a free website. So I can mention this as a free website. But the reason why I mentioned the wiki at this juncture is because they have gone through, the contributors to the Research Wiki have gone through and created a web page called Helpful International Websites by country, and have listed Europe, Eastern European, Scandinavian, Hispanic, etc., all sorts of country websites. The ones that I mentioned that exist are here on this particular, linked from this particular page. So there's another level of searching that you can do rather than simply putting in kind of random searches on Google. Here's an organized list of lots and lots and lots of websites where you can go out and get additional information. Now, maybe you're getting the impression here at this point that there's a lot of stuff. There's more information. One of the difficulties is kind of what we talk about is called information overload. In other words, you can get to the point where there's just more than you can process. The answer to that is focus and look for specific information. Be more specific. Don't just cruise around and hope you run into something helpful. And don't get distracted. If you find when you do a search in the newspapers that you've got newspaper articles for different people in your family, and you are worried because that's not the people I'm working on right now, then you put that into a look at the Chronicling America some other time. Come back to Helpful International Websites when I need this information, kind of thing. But the purpose of this particular webinar, from my standpoint, was to open up these doors and show that we're really, really out there at a tremendous amount of information. Now, there's always the refrain that comes back from genealogists says, well, it's not all digitized. It's not all online. The answer to that is absolutely. You're absolutely correct. But basically, when you're sitting at home and you're wishing during the pandemic and you're wishing that you could take a trip to some country or to some part of the United States to do some research, you may very well want to use all of the resources that are online, some of which do not identify themselves as genealogical websites. Now, this was another example, and I picked this one up because it is a very valuable website and is not primarily family history, but it's more cultural heritage, and they include a lot of family history and things that are useful. What you'll see the list here is yearbooks, newspapers, memorabilia, city directories. These are kinds of things that you really need to be aware out there, and you can visualize. This is digitalnorthcarolina.org. And what it is a compilation of 276 libraries, museums, and archives across North Carolina. One thing that I learned early in my learning about genealogy, and I just got interested one time in North Carolina, and I seem to come back. In the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've had at least 2 or 3 people ask me questions that ended up in North Carolina. It's just incredible. But with North Carolina, it was the number of libraries, museums, and archives that they had. They have 276 libraries, museums, and archives, including the university libraries, of which they have about, university and colleges, about 50. So it's a fabulous place to do research because you never end up with all that information. It's just beyond what you could possibly do. And if you really want the beyond your comprehension website, not in actual numbers, but just in the size of the collection here, is the New York Public Library. And they have and continue to add to their online collections. And you can see up there in the corner that of the right-hand corner, there's about almost 900,000 items that are digitized from their collections. And they include manuscripts and maps and photographs and all sorts of information that's the question they have is, well, what is there that what about my ancestors, whatever. The problem that you get into as a genealogist is you think, unless the library jumps out and says, oh, I have references on Sam Anderson, and you get all the information. That's not the point. The point is there may not be anything about Sam Anderson, but there may be something about his neighborhood, and there may be something about where he lived. There may be some history that lets you understand where you should look for records and how he lived or she lived, and how that information is there. And they may have pictures that are invaluable in giving you a perspective about your family. And a lot of this stuff is in the public domain, meaning it's completely copyable. You just download all this information to use without asking anybody, without paying anything for it. Yeah, and this kind of goes into the same. This is the Smithsonian. One of the things you're going to be completely overwhelmed with is the amount of information that's in the Smithsonian and all of the library, all of the museums and things and libraries that are there in their collections, but how little of it has actually been digitized. So there's about 30,000. There's thousands of rare books and journals and manuscripts, but sometimes what these websites will do it will give you a reason to go visit the actual physical location at some point, and use that to go and search their collections in their actual collections. And it is, but from the standpoint of understanding that there is this amount of information and that it's there, it's important to be there. This goes into a completely different type of website. And this is called the Open Education Database. And it has a list here of 250 digital libraries and archives. Okay, so this is a way to, these are gateways or doorways into even more information than I could possibly talk about in the matter of an hour. Now, kind of at the end of this, and we're getting there, is we have the Family History Guide, the fhguide.com. Now, this is a free website. It is structured, organized, and sets out in a very structured way how to learn how to use all this information. FamilySearch, on Ancestry, on MyHeritage, Find My Past. But for genealogists who are looking for references, this is the most organized list of thousands of links to references in all of these countries. And we've just spent time recently adding more information to this website. This is the one of the websites that I've worked with for the last few years in helping to add information and to expand. So this is a great outline of all of these countries on how to get started in each of these places for research, including the United States and including every county in the United States, and in England, every county in England. So if you need to know how to get started and you need to know some links, there's also a tremendous amount of information linked out of here, with more websites than I can possibly cover. So I need to emphasize that the opportunities to learn are endless. You're never going to get to the end of it. There's always another website. There's always more information. There's always another place to go to look and to learn about the families. And so I just want to kind of hopefully convey to you the importance of keeping going and understanding that that you can learn this stuff, that there is a way, and all of this information is out there, and it's out there for you to use and to pour into all of this stuff, pour into your individual families. Okay, thanks for watching. Remind you that these webinars are uploaded to the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel. They'll also be posted on the BYU Family History Library website. So you can watch that again or go back and get the links or the names of the websites. All of them can be found rather easily by doing a Google search. So thanks. Any questions, Brian?
Awesome. Thanks, James. It looks like we have a couple questions in the chat box. The first one is from Peggy. It says, is genealogynets.de in the English language?
Yes. That was simple. The answer to those questions about that is that Google Translate will translate almost all of the languages that you'll run into English anyway. But that's why there's a genealogy in English one and one in German, because there's actually two separate websites for them, and one is in English and one is in German.
Awesome. And it also looks like Susan and Wilbur have similar questions. So they ask, is there a handout of links, or do you have a list of the websites?
The handout is the video. Unfortunately, I was put, it's no excuse, but actually I did all this yesterday. So that's why I emphasize that you'll come back to the video and go through, and you can just stop and copy out all that information. Actually, if you get into almost any of these websites, you'll start to get the idea, and you can find all this stuff.
Awesome. And we'll wait just about 30 more seconds for any other questions from the audience in the group chat.
I might mention what this is. This picture on here is a lenticular cloud. It is a cloud formation that forms when there's really high winds aloft, not necessarily on the ground. and they form over mountains and sometimes not on a mountain, but they're rather interesting cloud formations. So we happen to have this view. This is the view that I have out my front room window. So one good reason for living where I do.
Awesome, yeah. And Steve asked if it's in Utah. I'd say
Oh
that it
yes,
is.
Provo. This
I've
is
seen that.
this is Mount Timpanogos in Utah Valley, from Utah Valley. Yes. Anything else?
It looks like that is about it.
Okay.
Great.
Well,
Go.
thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, James. And we really appreciate you filling in last second with this webinar. Just a reminder to everyone that our webinar will be next week. Our next webinar will be next week, Wednesday at 5:30, same time. And it will also be with James Tanner. 2020 update basics of Find My Past. So be sure to join us for that. Thanks once again for joining us today, and we hope you have a great day.